Investigate his claims. Examine the evidence. Make your decision.
After saying these things, Jesus crossed the Kidron Valley with his disciples and entered a grove of olive trees. Judas, the betrayer, knew this place because Jesus had often gone there with his disciples. The leading priests and Pharisees had given Judas a contingent of Roman soldiers and temple guards to accompany him. Now, with blazing torches, lanterns, and weapons, they arrived at the olive grove. Jesus fully realized all that was going to happen to him, so he stepped forward to meet them.
"Who are you looking for?"
he asked.
"Jesus the Nazarene,"
they replied.
"I am he."
Jesus said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. As Jesus said,
"I am he,"
they all drew back and fell to the ground. Once more he asked them,
"Who are you looking for?"
and again they replied,
"Jesus the Nazarene."
"I told you that I am he.
Jesus said.
And since I am the one you want, let these others go."
He did this to fulfill his own statement, "I did not lose a single one of those you have given me." Then Simon Peter drew a sword and slashed off the right ear of Malchus, the high priest's slave. But Jesus said to Peter,
"Put your sword back into its sheath. Shall I not drink from the cup of suffering the Father has given me?"
Just as olives in the garden were squeezed and crushed, so Jesus could feel the impending weight of suffering that he would endure in the hours ahead. When Jesus was betrayed and arrested, his disciples were scattered, and Peter followed at a distance.
So the soldiers, their commanding officer, and the temple guards arrested Jesus and tied him up. First, they took him to Annas, since he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest at that time. Caiaphas was the one who had told the other Jewish leaders,
"It's better that one man should die for the people."
Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another of the disciples. That other disciple was acquainted with the high priest, so he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard with Jesus. Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and she let Peter in. The woman asked Peter,
"You're not one of that man's disciples, are you?"
"No,"
he said.
"I am not."
Because it was cold, the household servants and the guards had made a charcoal fire. They stood around it warming themselves, and Peter stood with them warming himself. Inside, the high priest began asking Jesus about his followers and what he had been teaching them. Jesus replied,
"Everyone knows what I teach. I have preached regularly in the synagogues and the temple, where the people gather. I have not spoken in secret. Why are you asking me this question? Ask those who heard me. They know what I said."
Then one of the temple guards standing nearby slapped Jesus across the face.
"Is that the way to answer the high priest?"
he demanded. Jesus replied,
"If I said anything wrong, you must prove it. But if I'm speaking the truth, why are you beating me?"
Then Annas bound Jesus and sent him to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, as Simon Peter was standing by the fire warming himself, they asked him again,
"You're not one of his disciples, are you?"
He denied it, saying,
"No, I am not."
But one of the household slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked,
"Didn't I see you out there in the olive grove with Jesus?"
Again Peter denied it, and immediately a rooster crowed.
You can hear the words of Jesus echoing in Peter's mind.
I tell you the truth, Peter. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me.
Everything that Jesus predicted was coming true.
Jesus' trial before Caiaphas ended in the early hours of the morning. Then he was taken to the headquarters of the Roman governor. His accusers didn't go inside because it would defile them and they wouldn't be allowed to celebrate the Passover. So Pilate, the governor, went out to them and asked,
What is your charge against this man?
We wouldn't have handed him over to you if he weren't a criminal.
They retorted.
Then take him away and judge him by your own law.
Pilate told them.
Only the Romans are permitted to execute someone.
The Jewish leaders replied. This fulfilled Jesus' prediction about the way he will die. Then Pilate went back into his headquarters and called for Jesus to be brought to him.
Are you the king of the Jews?
He asked him. Jesus replied,
Is this your own question? Or did others tell you about me?
Am I a Jew?
Pilate retorted.
Your own people and their leading priests brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done?
Jesus answered,
My kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world.
Pilate said.
So you are a king?
Jesus responded,
You say I am a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize that what I say is true.
What is truth?
Pilate asked. Then he went out again to the people and told them,
He is not guilty of any crime. But you have a custom of asking me to release one prisoner each year at Passover. Would you like me to release this king of the Jews?
But they shouted back,
No! Not this man! We want Barabbas!
Barabbas was a revolutionary. Then Pilate had Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him.
Hail, King of the Jews!
They mocked as they slapped him across the face.
Pilate had a problem on his hands. If he let Jesus go, there would be an uprising. The Emperor Caesar would scold him for not keeping the peace in Jerusalem. If he sentenced Jesus to death, he would be killing an innocent man. Pilate tried to appease the Jews by having Jesus flogged, perhaps hoping that they would take pity on him.
Pilate went outside again and said to the people,
I'm going to bring him out to you now, but understand clearly that I find him not guilty.
Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said,
Look, here is the man.
When they saw him, the leading priests and temple guards began shouting,
Crucify him! Crucify him!
Take him yourselves and crucify him.
Pilate said.
I find him not guilty.
The Jewish leaders replied,
By our law, he ought to die, because he called himself the Son of God.
When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him,
Where are you from?
But Jesus gave no answer.
Why don't you talk to me?
Pilate demanded.
Don't you realize I have the power to release you or crucify you?
Then Jesus said,
You would have no power over me at all, unless it were given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin.
Then Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders shouted,
If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar.
When they said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down on the judgment seat on the platform that is called the stone pavement, in Hebrew Gabbatha. It was now about noon on the day of preparation for the Passover. And Pilate said to the people,
Look, here is your king.
Away with him!
They yelled.
Away with him! Crucify him!
What? Crucify your king?
Pilate asked.
We have no king but Caesar!
The leading priests shouted back. Then Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified.
Pilate was afraid, for the Jews were demanding that Jesus be crucified. Crucifixion was a slow and a painful death, reserved for notorious criminals. But Pilate had a decision to make. Would he risk an uprising by freeing Jesus, or would he sentence Jesus to death and give Caesar no reason to question his capability as governor? Would he choose Caesar or Jesus? He chose Caesar.